The palace had prepared for every scenario except this. When Charles's doctors handed the king a private report, what followed would shake the monarchy to its foundation. For the first time in history, a future king wasn't waiting, he was acting. William's emergency decision wasn't ambition, it was survival. But what did the doctors say that turned succession into a ticking clock? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It happened behind closed doors, in a room that had witnessed decades of royal briefings, but never one quite like this. Charles III sat upright, dignified as ever, as the lead physician delivered the prognosis in carefully measured phrases. The language was clinical, controlled, respectful. Yet beneath the medical terminology lay a devastating truth. The timeline was uncertain and shorter than anyone had prepared for. There were no dramatic declarations, no theatrical gasps, just a single pause that stretched too long. Charles asked one question, not about pain, not about treatment, but about time. The answer was not exact, but it was enough. Enough to change everything. Within minutes, Sandringham shifted into silent lockdown. Security tightened. Communication channels were restricted. A discreet medical convoy remained on standby. Only 4 individuals were immediately briefed: Queen Camilla, William, the king's private secretary, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Even among them, the details were limited. The message was simple and terrifying. The king must conserve strength, and plans must accelerate. Not publicly, not yet, but urgently. William received the call just before dawn. He had barely slept, unaware that the sunrise would mark the beginning of a new era. When the words were spoken measured, diplomatic, but unmistakable, his response was not emotional. It was resolute. The heir who had spent his life preparing for one day was suddenly told that one day might arrive far sooner than tradition allowed. For the first time in modern royal history, a future monarch was warned in stark terms. We may not have years, we may not have months. It was not a prediction of death. It was a warning of instability. The weight of it settled instantly. William understood that uncertainty is the monarchy's greatest enemy. A crown without clarity invites speculation. Speculation invites chaos. And chaos, in a modern media landscape, spreads faster than any royal decree can contain. This was not simply about a father's health, it was about national continuity. The Commonwealth, the military oath, the church, the fragile thread of constitutional balance that binds it all together. If the public sensed weakness, if Parliament caught wind of internal hesitation, the consequences would ripple far beyond palace gates. Charles, ever the statesman, insisted on composure. He would not abdicate in panic. He would not collapse under rumor. But he also knew the cost of denial. His reign had only just begun, yet history was already knocking, and somewhere between dignity and duty, he gave a quiet instruction. Prepare, not for mourning, but for transition. Carefully, quietly, decisively. William did not argue. He did not hesitate. In that fragile moment, the line between son and sovereign blurred. And while Charles wrestled with mortality, William began preparing for history to arrive early, very early. Before the sun rose, William had summoned his most trusted advisors. No ceremony, no cameras. This wasn't about tradition, it was about preservation. With Charles resting under medical observation, William drafted a plan no royal had ever touched: a coronation without a death. In the hours after learning of his father's condition, William didn't retreat into grief or wait for instructions, he moved with precision. A discreet message was sent to his inner circle, requesting an immediate gathering under the strictest confidentiality. The location was off the books, the attendee list razor thin. Those present understood the magnitude. This was not a planning session, it was a war room. What they were about to set in motion had never been attempted in modern royal history. The meeting opened with a single phrase from William: "The crown cannot wait." What followed was unprecedented. Leaked transcripts later revealed the term accelerated transition was used repeatedly. Advisors argued over the constitutional implications, wary of how the public might interpret such a maneuver. Could a coronation truly occur before a monarch's death? Would it be seen as power-hungry or pragmatic? The debate was fierce, but William cut through the noise with a single principle: duty over tradition. The monarchy, he said, wasn't built on comfort, it was built on endurance. If they waited too long, the vacuum of silence could destabilize everything the crown stood for. Legal teams were brought in discreetly and immediately began drafting 2 sets of documents, one for a possible abdication should Charles become unable to perform his duties, and another for a Regency-style model allowing William to assume public-facing leadership without triggering constitutional upheaval. The logistics were complex. Lines of succession needed to remain unbroken. Religious protocols had to be modified under intense secrecy. And perhaps most critically, Parliament could not know yet. William was unwilling to risk political interference. In his mind, public legitimacy had to come before legislative involvement. That meant controlling the story before it controlled them. He knew that the moment the media caught wind of Charles's condition, speculation would spiral. The monarchy would lose its grip, and once that grip slipped, it wouldn't be easily reclaimed. So he made the call: secure the church, alert key Commonwealth partners off record, and prepare for the rollout of what would be called an emergency coronation. Tension hung in the air as decisions were finalized. Some advisors privately feared it was too soon, that the public would see it as a betrayal of a living king. But William wasn't focused on public emotion. He was focused on stability. History, he believed, would understand. Eventually. And if not, then so be it. The crown would survive, even if it meant he'd wear it earlier than he ever imagined. But William wasn't just planning a future coronation, he was preparing to take the throne before his father left it. In a private chamber lined with history, William did the unthinkable. He stepped forward. Not as a son, but as a sovereign in waiting. And Charles, frail but lucid, didn't resist. What passed between father and son was more than approval, it was surrender. But what forced this handover of power so quickly? The meeting was unannounced, unrecorded, and unforgettable. Just the king and his heir, bound not by protocol, but by reality. 42 minutes behind closed doors, no aides, no transcripts, no distractions. Just 2 men facing a future neither had expected to come so soon. Charles, weary from medical consultation and the quiet erosion of strength, did not speak like a monarch. He spoke like a man confronting inevitability. He did not rage. He did not plead. He simply listened, and then he let go. No signature. No ceremony. But with one nod and a whispered confirmation, the tide turned. Power had not been taken. It had been relinquished. Immediately, subtle changes began to ripple through the palace. Staff were instructed to update briefing titles, addressing William as acting principal in private documents. Internal channels routed sensitive information directly to him. The symbolic shift had begun quiet but unmistakable. William was now receiving head of state updates first, bypassing traditional protocol. Some resisted the adjustment. But resistance was irrelevant. The machine of monarchy had begun to turn, and no one could stop it now. Queen Camilla, noticeably absent during the exchange, issued no statement. Her silence stirred speculation, especially among palace aides who noted her growing frustration with how quickly decisions were being made without her presence. Whether by choice or design, she was sidelined from the moment that chamber door closed. The succession narrative was no longer hers to influence. It belonged to William and to history. Charles made only one request: a final appearance, one more moment before the public eye. Not to reassure them, but to acknowledge them. It would be a subtle farewell, cloaked in the language of continuity. He wanted no mourning, no drama, no televised exit, just a final bow, brief and deliberate. It was his way of maintaining dignity in a situation spiraling beyond control. William agreed, but his attention was already shifting. The machinery of transition needed fuel, speed, and silence. Advisors moved under tight orders. Schedules were redrawn. Flags and seals reviewed. The tone across royal communication darkened not out of grief, but out of necessity. The world would not be told until it was ready to see. Because in William's eyes, This wasn't just about claiming the crown, it was about preserving the kingdom. As Charles disappeared from the public stage, William began assembling the pieces of a crown that wasn't yet his, but soon would be. It didn't happen in Westminster Abbey. It didn't follow the pageantry of past kings. Instead, it was something else, quieter, colder, and far more urgent. Behind locked doors and guarded corridors, William took the first steps toward his coronation, without telling the world it had already begun. In the heart of the palace, while public schedules projected calm and normalcy, a single hallway was closed off to all but the most trusted. At its end, the chapel royal, normally a site of reflection, was transformed into something far more potent. It was here that a whispered ritual, rarely used and even more rarely acknowledged, was initiated. No fanfare, no cameras, just 11 people, handpicked and bound by silence, were permitted entry. Catherine stood among them, her presence symbolic and deliberate. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales. In that room, she was the bridge between past and future. At the center of the ritual, a relic emerged from a velvet-lined case, a ring last worn by George VI, said to symbolize the quiet fortitude of a reluctant monarch. Slipped onto William's finger, it was less an adornment and more an inheritance. A moment captured not by palace photographers, but by a single blurred image that would later leak, igniting 1,000 theories. In it, William stands solemn, the ring visible, the mood unmistakable. A royal aide, overheard outside the chapel, muttered 6 words that would define the moment forever. This is the beginning of the reign. But officially, nothing had changed. No statements were made, no schedules adjusted. The press was fed stories about routine royal meetings, while key staff members were rotated to avoid pattern detection. The illusion of business as usual was maintained with clinical precision. Clergy present at the ceremony were asked, some say pressured, to sign non-disclosure agreements. It wasn't coercion exactly, it was tradition, reimagined under duress. Loyalty to the crown now meant loyalty to the transition, unspoken, unseen, but undeniably real. And yet, even the most carefully constructed illusions have cracks. The world began to sense something was off. William's demeanor shifted. Catherine's rare public smiles grew more reserved. Statements from royal spokespeople felt increasingly hollow, as if spoken through gritted teeth. The monarchy was operating in a different rhythm, one half step ahead of reality. Insiders knew the truth. This wasn't anticipation. This was succession unfolding in slow motion, deliberately cloaked in ritual and secrecy to avoid panic and to buy time. Still, outside the palace gates, the silence surrounding one man grew louder than everything else combined. Charles. Where was he? Days had passed since his last appearance. No images, no videos, no carefully orchestrated handshakes or ribbon cuttings. Just absence. And as the public began to ask questions the palace wasn't prepared to answer, the narrative threatened to escape their control. But while William ascended in shadow, the world began to notice something strange. Charles had vanished. Days passed. No footage, no wave from the balcony, no briefings. The king was gone. Rumors swirled. Had he collapsed? Was he under sedation? Or worse? Behind palace walls, a quiet storm brewed. Some feared William had overstepped. Others believed he hadn't gone far enough. The last confirmed sighting of Charles placed him at Sandringham, escorted by a minimal detail, allegedly for rest and recovery. But from the moment he disappeared behind those estate walls, nothing emerged, no imagery, no handwritten messages, no signs of life. Buckingham Palace, known for its tightly worded statements during times of crisis, issued a vague and sterile update. The king was resting under close medical supervision. But the statement raised more questions than it answered. Resting from what? How serious was his condition? And most importantly, why had the man wearing the crown gone completely silent? In Parliament, murmurs turned into closed-door debates. Opposition MPs demanded clarity, citing constitutional stability and the public's right to transparency. If the monarch was no longer capable of executing his duties, then succession protocols needed to be engaged officially. But nothing formal came. No Regency Council was named. No abdication declared. It was a monarchy suspended in limbo, orchestrated by a prince who now walked a line so thin it barely existed. William hadn't announced himself as king, but neither had he denied it. Inside the palace, pressure was mounting. Camilla, once the fortress beside Charles, reportedly made several requests for a media appearance or a controlled update from her husband. Each time her request was delayed or redirected, insiders began to whisper of tension between the Queen and William's camp. She wanted the world to see Charles alive. William wanted the world to prepare for when he no longer would be. The two visions of legacy were now openly at war, one clinging to the present, the other hurtling toward the future. Online, the vacuum of truth ignited a wildfire. Conspiracy theories took hold like ivy. Charles had been sedated to prevent a public collapse. He had already passed and the palace was stalling for transition logistics. Some even speculated that William had forced a quiet incapacitation order to prevent his father from retracting the verbal assent. None of it could be proven. But with every silent hour, the theories gained traction. And then, Catherine appeared. She wasn't scheduled. She didn't speak. But her solo presence at a military hospital visit, normally a joint affair, sent a thunderous message. Where was Charles? Why wasn't William beside her? Was this a soft rollout of a new royal order? Her composure was flawless, but her solitude spoke volumes. Even the press couldn't ignore it. Headlines shifted from health updates to succession watch. The public wasn't just curious anymore, they were preparing. The silence had outlived its purpose. If the monarchy was going to survive the suspicion, it needed clarity. William knew this. And he knew the window to act was shrinking. The moment was no longer approaching, it had arrived. But as silence deepened, William made his boldest move yet, summoning the church and the crown estate to begin the final phase. It was never supposed to happen like this. But William made the call. The coronation wheels began turning. And this time, there was no going back. In a moment of constitutional chaos, the nation found itself preparing for a king, while another still lived. The signal was sent through an encrypted channel used only in times of sovereign transition. Level 5 Internal Royal Alert, an operational command designed to activate contingency plans for an immediate change in leadership. But this wasn't protocol following a death. It was strategy dictated by uncertainty. William had decided that waiting was no longer an option. The country, the crown, and the legacy itself were standing on a fault line, and something had to shift before the entire structure collapsed. He wasn't stepping into the role because he wanted it. He was stepping in because he believed the monarchy wouldn't survive the alternative. The Church of England received the first instruction: prepare sacred items, secure the coronation regalia, and do so without drawing attention. Clergy were given less than 48 hours to coordinate, but not to announce. Behind ancient walls, rehearsals began under the cover of prayer meetings. Silence was enforced by fear, not fear of William, but of history repeating itself. A crown without clarity invites chaos, and William was determined to claim it before the public demanded to know why it hadn't happened already. Simultaneously, military channels lit up. Operational standby notices were issued to ceremonial units across the country. It was not a full mobilization, but it was enough to raise questions. Key personnel were activated, uniforms prepped, schedules cleared. The movement was subtle but deliberate. Nothing dramatic, just enough preparation to stage a coronation without alerting a nation. This was not tradition. It was a controlled takeover disguised in reverence. Inside palace walls, invitations were drafted not for celebration, but for control. Names were selected, attendees briefed, venues scouted. Yet none of it was released. No courier sent, no embargo lifted. The guest list remained frozen in planning documents while the press remained locked out. Simultaneously, senior media editors were summoned under strict confidentiality. They weren't told the full truth, but they were told enough. Prepare your front pages. Archive your royal retrospectives. The time is near. But do not publish. Not yet. Whispers of a parallel coronation model emerged, first among legal scholars, then among those closest to the crown. A model that did not require a death or even a formal abdication. A model that used ceremonial power to shift public leadership, while quietly retaining technical sovereignty. Constitutional lawyers debated the legality, but William didn't need consensus. He needed action. And now, that action had begun. Everything was in motion. The throne was being cleared, not with force, but with inevitability. The world still didn't know the full truth about Charles's condition, but it was about to know something far more immediate. His reign had ended in silence, and William's had begun in shadows. And as news began to spread, one person broke the silence with a threat that could derail everything. Prince Harry. He flew in unannounced. No schedule, no media, just rage. Harry's return wasn't about grief, it was about power. With Charles unreachable and William seizing the throne, the younger brother launched one last attempt to stop what he called a hostile takeover of legacy. Landing under the radar at a private terminal near London, Harry arrived flanked by close protection, but not by Meghan. Her absence was deafening, interpreted by many as either protest or protection. Either way, it was clear, Harry wasn't here to heal old wounds. He was here to ignite them. Within hours, his team began leaking carefully selected correspondences to trusted journalists' emails, memos, and personal notes, highlighting that Harry had never been formally informed of any coronation plans. He painted a picture of exclusion, a deliberate act of erasure orchestrated by his brother. His message was clear. This wasn't just about the crown, it was about betrayal at the highest level. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was inevitable. Behind the gates of Clarence House, with the air still heavy from the last royal strategy session, Harry and William came face to face. What followed wasn't a reconciliation, it was a reckoning. Voices rose, accusations flew. William stood firm, emotion buried beneath command. Harry, unfiltered and volatile, accused him of turning succession into a coup. "Dad isn't dead," he snapped. "But you're acting like he never mattered." William responded not with apologies, but with silence. The silence of a man who believed he had already won. The meeting lasted less than an hour, and when it ended, Harry stormed out, visibly shaken but defiant. That same evening, legal murmurs began to surface. His advisors were reportedly exploring emergency injunctions documents that could halt or delay the coronation on constitutional grounds. The argument? That any transfer of power without public or parliamentary acknowledgement of the king's medical status was illegitimate. It wasn't just about optics now. It was a legal landmine, and Harry had just stepped on it. As the media scrambled to interpret what Harry's return truly meant, insiders claimed that William refused to meet again. "He's made his choice," William allegedly said, "and so have I." Publicly, the palace remained mute, but the walls of power were pulsing with tension. Two brothers, once symbols of unity, now stood as opposing forces in a monarchy unraveling behind gold-trimmed curtains. Outside, public opinion fractured. Some sympathized with Harry, calling him the only one brave enough to challenge a silent system. Others saw desperation, a last-minute attempt to reclaim relevance in a story that had already moved on without him. Either way, the stakes had shifted. This was no longer just a royal transition. It was a civil war of legacy, and neither side would leave unscathed. But William, unmoved by emotion or guilt, pushes forward knowing that what comes next would either crown him or crush him. That it wasn't a day of celebration, it was a day of reckoning. As the emergency coronation unfolded, the world watched with breathless anticipation. No king had ever risen like this. And as William took the crown, one question remained. Would history call it duty or betrayal? There was no procession, no roaring crowd, no golden coach gliding through the streets. William entered the chapel not as a prince on display, but as a commander walking into war. The ceremony was stripped bare, deliberate, efficient, symbolic. Every detail had been chosen for one purpose only: control. There would be no leaks, no last-minute disruptions, no chance for chaos to interrupt what had already begun behind palace gates. Cameras were present, but the live broadcast was withheld. A delay, by design. William didn't want the world watching this unfold in real time. He wanted to control how it was seen and when. The mood inside was tense. The few witnesses gathered, senior clergy, key advisors, and members of the inner circle, understood the weight of the moment. This was not just a coronation. This was a calculated act of stability in a time of unspoken crisis. The scepter of state, the most powerful symbol of royal authority, sat beside the crown in silence. No speeches celebrated legacy. No acknowledgments were made to the monarch still living in seclusion. Charles's name was absent from the liturgy, his image removed from the staging. The message was unmistakable. This was not a handover, it was a reset. Catherine stood beside William throughout, her role quietly pivotal. Her presence was not ornamental, it was essential. As she placed the mantle over his shoulders, it wasn't just as a wife, it was as the bridge between what was and what would be. Her silence through the weeks prior, her strategic appearances, and her unwavering composure now culminated in a gesture more powerful than words. She was not beside a king in waiting. She was standing beside the king the monarchy had already accepted. The final moment arrived. William stepped forward and lifted the scepter. Not handed to him, not bestowed, but claimed. In that one act, the past was severed. The transition was no longer hypothetical. It was complete. For the first time in centuries, the crown had changed hands without death, without abdication, without announcement. Only action. The broadcast, when it finally aired, was edited for precision. Every frame sharpened, every pause measured. Public reaction was immediate and divided. Some called it visionary, others sacrilege, but it didn't matter. The crown had moved. The monarchy, whether the public liked it or not, had a new face. But while the nation bowed to a new king, the palace still held one final secret: Charles had left something behind. 3 hours after the coronation, a handwritten letter was released to the press signed by Charles. In it, a father speaks to a son, a king to his heir. And in its pages, the truth comes out not of betrayal, but of resignation. Of a man who knew he was losing time and chose legacy over ego. The letter arrived not through the palace's official media channels, but via an unexpected source, the Royal Archives Office, accompanied by a sealed statement confirming its authenticity and Charles's full blessing for its release. In an age dominated by digital statements and pre-recorded broadcasts, the impact of a handwritten letter, tangible, vulnerable, and hauntingly final, landed like a thunderclap across every newsroom and television studio. Dated just 2 days before the emergency coronation, the letter was written in Charles's own hand, steady but raw, filled with both sorrow and stunning clarity. There were no defenses, no bitterness, no clinging to power, only confession and a quiet surrender to inevitability. The letter opened with an acknowledgement of the truth the palace had refused to confirm. Yes, the king had been diagnosed. Yes, the condition was serious. And yes, his time as a functioning monarch was over long before the public was told. But more than illness, Charles confessed something few expected. He had seen the change in William long before doctors handed him the timeline. The way his son carried the burden, made decisions in silence, held the institution together in the growing void. In Charles's words, there is a difference between waiting to lead and being ready to lead. My son had become the latter, and I, the former. There was no flattery, no ceremonial language, just a father's voice, stripped of crown and title. He admitted that the pressure to hold on, to appear strong, had blinded him to what the monarchy needed most: continuity without collapse. I asked William to act, the letter revealed, before the world realized the crown had no pilot. That single line reframed the entire narrative. William had not seized power. He had fulfilled a request one made not in weakness, but in private, courageous resolve. But one omission sparked immediate speculation. Nowhere in the letter was Camilla mentioned. Not her role, not her support, not even her presence. A queen consort erased from her husband's final royal reflection. Analysts debated whether it was a private slight, a personal omission, or a quiet commentary on her absence during the final days of Charles's visible reign. Whatever the reason, the silence spoke volumes and would remain one of the letter's most whispered mysteries. The letter closed with a line that instantly etched itself into the annals of royal history. I did not die a king. I lived to crown one. It was not abdication. It was an anointing. A final act of stewardship that defied centuries of tradition. In that moment, grief and awe swept the nation in equal measure. The divide that had fractured the monarchy in recent years suddenly felt irrelevant. Supporters, critics, even Republicans paused to absorb the weight of what had just unfolded. It wasn't just the end of Charles's reign, it was the beginning of a new royal era, defined not by the rigidity of bloodlines, but by the courage to know when to step aside. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear: royalty had changed forever. And it all began with a timeline. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.